Welcome once again to our Easter Bible study. We will take up today the account of the resurrection appearances and other stories as found in the Gospel of Matthew. However, there's a unique feature of Matthew's account. After the burial of Jesus, there's an intervening story about placing guards at the tomb. This is unique to Matthew. In order to understand Matthew's announcement of the resurrection, we need to back up a little bit to the burial. So I'm going to look at this narrative as being composed of 5 episodes, or like 5 acts to a play. The first would be Matthew 27, verses 57 to 61, about the burial by Joseph of Arimathea, who is identified as a disciple, with women who are present at the burial. The second scene, chapter 27, verses 62 to 66, is about the chief priests and the Pharisees placing guards at the tomb. The third act, chapter 28, verses 1 to 10, is about women coming to the tomb. An angel of the Lord descends and frightens the guards, revealing to the women that Jesus had been risen. And they are to tell the disciples that Jesus is going to Galilee, and then Jesus appears to the women. Then Act 4, chapter 28, verses 11 to 15, the guards are bribed by the chief priests and assembled leaders to lie and tell that the disciples stole the body. And then in Act 5, chapter 28, verses 16 to 20, we find the appearance of Jesus to the 11 disciples. This is something unique to Matthew. He's very specific. After the resurrection, he refers to the 11, no longer the 12, because of the departure of Judas. So Jesus appears to the 11 disciples and commissions them to go out to all nations. So if we look at this outline then of these 5 scenes, we can see that scenes 1, 3, and 5 concern those who are favorable toward Jesus, whereas episodes 2 and 4 concern hostile Jewish authorities and the Roman guards they employ to assist them. It's interesting to just think back to the beginning of Matthew's gospel to notice that in the infancy accounts, there's a similar alteration between those who are favorable toward the infant Jesus and those who are hostile. So we find again a 5-part outline when we look closely at the infancy narrative of Matthew's gospel. Scene 1, the Annunciation by an angel to Joseph. Of course, the Annunciation in Matthew's Gospel is to Joseph, not to Mary, about the conception of Jesus, instructing him to recognize Jesus as his son. Second scene, the Magi come from the east to worship the King of the Jews, only to encounter a hostile Herod, who is with the chief priests and scribes. The Gentile Magi worship Jesus. And then the third scene from the infancy accounts is the revelation by the angel of the Lord, again to Joseph, to take the child and his mother to Egypt to preserve the child's life. Scene 4, Herod kills the male children of Bethlehem in his attempt to kill Jesus. And scene 5, revelation again by the angel of the Lord to Joseph that those who sought the child's life are dead, and he should return to Nazareth. Notice again, scenes 1, 3, and 5 are all positive. Each is a revelation by an angel, a messenger of God, while scenes 2 and 4 are negative and show a hostile act toward Jesus. This could be an example of inclusion, which I mentioned already in Mark's gospel. In other words, similar theme and structure at the beginning of the gospel, at the end of the gospel, again, like bookends at either end of the gospel. So what I intend to do now is to proceed scene by scene with the accounts from the end of the gospel. We'll look at scenes 1, 2, and 3 in the first part of the presentation, and then there'll be another presentation where I will look at episodes 4 to 5. So as we begin then with the episode in chapter 27, verse 57 to 61, the burial in the tomb. We read, "When it was evening, there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who was also a disciple of Jesus. He went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then Pilate ordered it to be given to him. So Joseph took the body and wrapped it in a clean linen cloth and laid it in his own new tomb, which he had hewn in the rock. He then rolled a great stone to the door of the tomb and went away. Mary Magdalene and the other Mary were there, sitting opposite the tomb." Now, if you heard the presentation I gave on Mark, you'll note some similarities and some differences in Matthew's account of the burial. Again, just to remind ourselves that Mark was written earliest of all the Gospels, around 65 to 70 AD, whereas Matthew and Luke are around 85 AD, so a good 15 to 20 years later. The burial of Jesus, as found in Matthew, contains the same basic elements that we saw in Mark. There are just a couple details that differ. We find out 2 additional details about Joseph of Arimathea. We're told in Matthew's account that he is a rich man, and he is a disciple of Jesus quite openly. There's no mention of him being secretly a disciple. Also, the women followers of Jesus, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary as she's referred, are in attendance at the burial. Although at the time of the Passion, Matthew also speaks of the women watching the crucifixion from a distance, like in Mark, when it comes to the burial, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary were there, sitting opposite the tomb. Another difference. Okay, next episode, chapter 27, verses 62 to 66, where the chief priests and Pharisees place a guard at the tomb. And so we read, beginning with verse 62, "The next day, that is, after the day of preparation, the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered before Pilate and said, 'Sir, we remember that impostor said while he was still alive, after 3 days I will rise again. Therefore, command the tomb to be made secure until the 3rd day. Otherwise, his disciples may go and steal him away, and tell the people he has been raised from the dead. And the last deception would be worse than the first.' Pilate said to them, 'You have a guard of soldiers. Go make it secure as you can.' So they went with the guard and made the tomb secure by sealing the stone." In the other Gospels, the hostility toward Jesus by the chief priests and Jewish leaders ends with the crucifixion. In Matthew, hostility toward Jesus and his followers continues after his death, and it impacts his burial. In the infancy narrative that Matthew begins his gospel with, on hearing of the birth of the King of the Jews, the secular ruler Herod worked with the chief priests and the scribes to kill him. They wanted to prevent the beginning of his career. Now, at the end of the gospel, the chief priests and the Pharisees or elders work again with a secular ruler, Pilate this time, to prevent the survival of his ministry. In each case, God will frustrate the armed might of these authorities. At the end of both the infancy narrative and the resurrection narrative, Jesus emerges triumphant. This was the lesson of encouragement for Matthew's readers, as it is for us today. The story about the tomb and the request for a guard, this whole episode, is unique to the Gospel of Matthew. In other words, we don't find it in the other three Gospels. Somehow, the Jewish leaders know that Jesus had predicted, "After 3 days I will rise again," even though not even the disciples believed it or understood it. Yet it seems the Jewish leaders perfectly understood what it meant. Consequently, they want the tomb made secure until the third day to frustrate Jesus' prophecy. Jesus is referred to as a deceiver or impostor. This description of Jesus will become common in later Jewish polemic against Jesus in the 1st and 2nd centuries. The skepticism of the authorities, plus their allegation that his disciples will steal the body, repeated again in chapter 28, verse 13, indicates that this was likely an issue in Matthew's community. That at the time that the gospel was being written, the early Christian community was experiencing this kind of opposition and polemics from the Jewish leaders. In the experience of Matthew's church, again, late 1st century, the Pharisees were the chief opponents of the Jewish Christians and undoubted skeptics about the resurrection of Jesus. This whole scene has been drawn from the context of apologetics and polemics. Another theme that comes across clearly is the inability of human power to frustrate God's plan. In their effort to prevent the resurrection, the leaders of the Jewish people enlist the help of the governing power, Pilate. Pilate responds to their request by providing Roman soldiers to guard the tomb. Thus, the Roman governing authority and the Jewish religious authorities conspire together against the resurrection of Jesus. Recall once again how in the infancy narratives, Herod conspired with the scribes and high priests against the life of Jesus. Despite the use of armed force, neither group of earthly powers proves successful. Sealing the stone and setting a guard will be futile attempts to thwart the power that God is about to release. Recall that Jesus was often accused of violating the Sabbath to do some good. Perhaps it's a deliberate irony that Matthew places on the Sabbath the efforts of the chief priests and the Pharisees to block the resurrection. It seems they're working quite hard on the Sabbath day. The third episode then, the resurrection proper, you might call it, chapter 28, verses 1 to 10. We hear about the women at the tomb, the angel of the Lord and his revelation, and then Jesus appears to the women. So we read, beginning with verse 1 of chapter 28, "After the Sabbath, as the first day of the week was dawning, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to see the tomb. And suddenly there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord descending from heaven came and rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothing white as snow. For fear of him, the guards shook and became like dead men. But the angel said to the women, 'Do not be afraid. I know that you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He is not here, for he has been raised, as he said. Come, see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples he has been raised from the dead. And indeed, he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him. This is my message for you.' So they left the tomb quickly with fear and great joy, and ran to tell his disciples. Suddenly, Jesus met them and said, 'Greetings.' And they came to him, took hold of his feet, and worshipped him. Then Jesus said to them, 'Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee. There they will see me.' So we see here that as soon as the Sabbath was over, Saturday, probably around 6 p.m., and the first day of the week is just beginning, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary set out to see the tomb. Nothing is said about coming to anoint Jesus, as we find in Mark and Luke. The guards, which only appear, of course, in Matthew's account, would never have permitted anyone to have access to the body. What the women actually see is a stunning series of events that are not found in any of the other Gospels. First of all, there's an earthquake. This is harmonious with what Matthew alone describes as occurring when Jesus dies. In chapter 27, verses 51 to 53, we're told that at the moment of Jesus' death, the earth shook and the rocks were split. The tombs also were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. Using his own unique sources, Matthew seeks to convey the wider importance of what God has done in Jesus. The main focus of the Passion narrative in this gospel has been the role of Jesus in the salvation of Israel. Matthew is writing his gospel for Jewish as well as Gentile Christians who made up the community in which he was. He wants to show that the reach of Jesus goes beyond the Jewish people. We saw that, again, in the infancy account. It's Matthew's gospel alone that has Gentiles, in the person of the Magi, worshiping the infant king of the Jews at the very beginning of his life. Jesus died with the charge over his head saying, "King of the Jews." But the earth quaked then as well, and the dead come out of their tombs. Furthermore, at that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook, the rocks were split, the tombs also were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. After his resurrection, they came out of the tombs and entered the holy city and appeared to many. Now, when the centurion and those with him who were keeping watch over Jesus saw the earthquake and what took place, they were terrified and said, "Truly, this man was God's Son." The Gentile centurion and soldiers witnessed these events and they acknowledge that Jesus is the Son of God. Again, these are Gentiles, not Jews. The Jews are still opposing, trying to block any talk about resurrection. Besides the openness to the Gentiles, Matthew also wants to show the cosmic importance of Jesus in the world. From his birth, through his death, and culminating his resurrection, Jesus is shaking the foundations of the world. In addition to the earthquake at the tomb, the angel of the Lord descends from heaven and rolls back the stone. Again, a detail we find only in Matthew. This dramatic scene has apocalyptic significance. The vivid imagery is apocalyptic, and the angel reminds the Jewish readers of the angel who announced the last days in the prophet Daniel. We find in Daniel, his appearance was like lightning. The great angel who came to Daniel had a face like lightning. We're told that the angel at the tomb of Jesus, that his garment was white as snow, like the garment mentioned in Daniel chapter 7, verse 9. The power of God has intervened definitively at the tomb of Jesus. In the presence of this power, the human powers who conspired to frustrate the resurrection are as nothing. In fear, the guards are shaken, even as the earth was shaken. There's a bit of irony in this, because we're told that the guards became like dead men, and yet Jesus, who died, lives. The ones who tried to prevent him from rising from the dead have themselves become like dead men. The first action of the angel of the Lord, whose arrival has been heralded by an earthquake, is to roll back the stone. This is God's way of undoing the attempt of the chief priest to thwart God's plan. However, this is not to suggest that the resurrection of Jesus took place at that moment. In fact, none of the Gospels claim that anyone had actually seen Jesus come forth from the tomb or rise from the dead. The reason? That event itself is beyond description. The next task of Matthew's angel of the Lord is to interpret the emptiness of the tomb. This phrase, angel of the Lord, serves as a revealer and interpreter of Matthew's infancy narratives as well. There we hear about an angel of the Lord who appears 3 times. The angel of the Lord explained Mary's pregnancy to Joseph, telling him that it stemmed from the Holy Spirit. Otherwise, this could be misinterpreted. So also here, the angel explains the empty tomb, which some Jews were misinterpreting as the result of the body being stolen. The angel explains that the reason is that Jesus has been raised. Going back to the infancy narratives, the second and third appearances of the angel there, the angel told Joseph what to do in response to the tremendous events that had taken place. And so now, after the resurrection, the angel of the Lord gives the women instructions to go quickly and tell the disciples that Jesus had been raised. Remember, those disciples of Jesus forsook him and fled when he was arrested. And Peter, the one exception who hesitantly tried to continue with Jesus by following at a distance, ends up denying him 3 times and cursing him. Yet they are still in God's plan and are to receive the revelation about the resurrection from these women. These women, who Matthew does not call disciples, although present at Galilee up till now, have had only a passive role of looking on at the death of Jesus from afar, sitting opposite the tomb when Jesus was buried. Now, they are rewarded for their initiative in coming to see the tomb by being made the first proclaimers, the first human proclaimers, we should say, of the resurrection. And they are the intermediaries through whom the faith of these disciples who had been disloyal, who had denied Jesus, their faith is going to be rekindled at the words of these women. They are invited to go quickly with reverential fear and great joy to tell the others. In this way, they are also models for Christian evangelizers of all time. They are further rewarded by an appearance of the risen Jesus himself. Not only do they have the word of the angel of the Lord, but Jesus himself appears to them. And the reaction of the women to the sight of the risen Jesus is interesting. They come up and worship him. Now, they come up. This is an expression that Matthew often uses as an action of expressing awe. So they were in awe and they worshiped him. Again, their reaction serves as a model for how Christians should respect the presence of the Lord. Furthermore, they clutch his feet, through which they are expressing their affection for Jesus. Jesus' message to the women repeats the message given them by the angel. A minor difference, though, is significant. While the angel told the women to report to Jesus' disciple, the message of Jesus to them is to go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee. There they will see me. No longer just disciples, they are now called brothers. A new status emerges for those who hear and believe in the resurrection. They become children of God, and thus brothers and sisters of Jesus. I'll look at episodes 4 and 5 in the next presentation, but let me leave you with just a couple questions for your reflection. Jesus comes to the disciples in their disappointment, in their fear, perhaps even their guilt, how they have deserted the Lord or not fulfilled the expectations that the Lord had for them. And yet, Jesus never leaves them alone. Jesus comes and invites them to renew their faith, to become disciples, to become followers again. Have you experienced in your own life that sense that somehow you have let the Lord down? And do you hear him again calling you to continue to be his disciple? In the Gospel of Matthew, it's very clear that the forces of evil, the enemy, those who are persecuting the Lord and his disciples, are not going to win out, that God is more powerful than all the forces of evil. Have you experienced the Lord's power in your own life? Have you come to experience the Lord overcoming evil, working with you to make good choices? And finally, Jesus calls his disciples brothers. We too are brothers and sisters of the Lord. By baptism, we have a new status. We share in the resurrected life of the Lord. The Lord has overcome sin and death, and that makes us brothers and sisters, children of the same Father. What does it mean for you to be a son or a daughter of God, a brother or a sister of the risen Lord? Take some time to reflect on. Take some time to take that in. What does it really mean to you? How does it strengthen you? How does it challenge you? May God bless you, and may the peace of the risen Christ be with you.